Hello everyone, I'm Extra Cheesy 87 and this is LP Reflections for Trails of Cold Steel 2. This video's been a little of a long time coming. I meant to record it like, I don't know, a month and a half ago, basically not that long after the Cold Steel 2 Let's Play finished, but instead I didn't do that. I recorded an entire Phoenix Wright Let's Play in the meantime and I kind of kept putting it off. I don't know, these videos are just a little since they require like setup time to like actually come up with like bullet points to talk about and stuff, so that they actually have like some semblance of a timeline to them. And I don't know, sometimes I'm just like, if I'm gonna use my recording time, I just want to make sure I'm like actually making a video, and I just get lazy and I don't do the outline stuff. But it's finally time, since we need to start the Cold Steel 3 Let's Play in probably a few days after this video goes up. I meant to start recording this Let's Play today, but I waited too long, or I kind of got caught up doing stuff, so that'll be starting tomorrow. I guess maybe the day this video goes up, because today's Wednesday the 26th, and I would like to have this video up tomorrow the 27th, so we'll see if that happens. But yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get in. We're basically just going to kind of talk about Cold Steel 2. Now that I've got like a little bit of distance from beating the game, maybe a little too much distance. That's the one problem with waiting this long, is that it's possible that I kind of like forget stuff that I maybe wanted to talk about, but essentially we're just going to kind of talk about the major points of the game, then also kind of have like an overall thoughts on the game, its missed opportunities, what it did good at. Some character power rankings at the end. We're gonna do like a little tier list thing. And then also some thoughts on the difficulty mod, why I think the difficulty mod for CS2 was worse than the one for CS1, and then some final conclusions. Alright, let's go and get started. So essentially, going into CS2, I had mixed expectations. My general vibe for CS2 is that it's generally regarded as like the worst in the Greater Trails series, even amongst like Cold Steel fans. Now, of course, I know there's, you know, outliers there, but that was kind of my general vibe. So I didn't have super high expectations for the game as a result. Well, people seem to be kind of mixed. It's like either they kind of like of the CS fans, because I mean, there's also a split between like, you know, those who like the Sky and not Cold Steel, Crossbell games, and the people who like the Cold Steel games. And then there's a split among like Cold Steel fans over like 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. Most people seem to like 1 more than 2, is my general vibe. So I didn't have like the greatest of expectations, I guess I should say. But I did really enjoy CS1, and especially the difficulty mod for CS1. So I was excited about that for this game, because I mean, the playing through Cold Steel 1 with the difficulty mod is probably one of the most fun I've had playing like a turn-based JRPG. Like a lot of those fights are just extremely well done and a lot of fun to like puzzle through. And like my overall kind of like conclusion about Cold Steel 2 before we go into like greater depth is that I did enjoy it the least of all the Trails games that I've played. But it does have its moments, and it is still a good game overall. It's just, in comparison to other gooder games, it's not as good. Yes, I know gooder's not a word. That was a joke. But alright, let's kind of talk about Act 1 and the prologue. The one thing I will say about the game, if we're going to start on a positive note, the prologue is the best in probably the entire series. The only prologue that I think is maybe a bit better is... I don't know. I mean, I really like the prologue for Sky 2, but some of the stuff that happens there isn't necessarily like super important, whereas everything that happens in the prologue in this game is like pretty vital. It builds off the cliffhanger from the last game. You have the inciting action of the attack on Ymir, plus the kidnapping of Elise and Alphen. I didn't forget her name. You thought I forgot her name. I didn't forget her name. But with the kidnapping there, so you have, like, you're kind of, like, late game goal is, of course, rescuing Elise and Alphen. You have that set up there at the start. The prologue is also like very short and to the point. It doesn't really drag like some of the prologues do in this series, but well, I guess most of them don't. Really, the only one that I think kind of drags a little bit is like the prologue for Zero in the first game, like Sky 1. Because like Sky 2's, it's a little draggy, but it's not that bad. And then 3 is very short and to the point. Azura's is very short and to the point. But yeah, and then kind of transitioning into the actual meat of Act 1, the whole, it's basically the process of getting the gang back together, which is done before in the series, but it's still always fun, and it helps add to some anticipation to these early portions of the story where you're not, like, your major events aren't happening yet, so instead you're being kind of, like, strung along by the idea of, like, oh, I can't wait to meet back up with my favorite character and see what they've been up to in the last, like, in-game month while, like, during the time skip. There is one problem, because the Act 1 has, like, a very strict formula for, like, the 3 major sections, right? Where you go to the new area, you recruit the people, then eventually you end up fighting a big bad, you lose in a cutscene / you get saved by someone, and then you do, like, a big mech fight. That formula got a little played out after, I don't know, like, the second time it happened. Like, for instance, in the Breahard section, the mech fight at the end of it felt like it was only there because that was the formula. Because they're like, hey, we have this mech combat system, we need to have it happen. So it's just because it's like you fight McBurn and then like some robots show up and you fight them too because reasons? I don't know. Because like at least for the one in Nord, that kind of like made sense because you were at an army-based tower. Same with... what's the other section? I know you do one in Celtic, right? I can't remember what you fight in Celtic. Am I crazy? Because you go to Celtic, and then what's the fight at the end of that section? Because I mean, I remember going to Nord, and you fight Blue Blanc and what's her name? And you have a big mech fight. Then after Nord is when you go to Breahard, where you go to the lake place first, and then who do you fight in Nord? Not Nord, Celtic. That's actually gonna bug the hell out of me. This is my memory right now. Cause when you fight them at the wall, yeah, at Guerrilla Fortress, you fight the Zephyr guys, which yeah, and there is a mech fight because it's like the army shows up or something. But yeah, I mean that's kind of like the essential formula for basically all of Act 1 is, you know, you go to a place, recruit the people, fight a big bad, lose in a cutscene, you get to win a mech fight at least. That's kind of it. The Zephyr fight, I mean, it wasn't like super fun gameplay wise, and then story wise, I don't know. It's just kind of, I felt like the Zephyr guys aren't built up all that much. I mean, like, because at the end of the day, it is still like a 7v2 fight, and it's just kind of annoying to, I mean, that's just like a general problem with basically, I mean, a lot of the Trails games, but it, you know, it's definitely gotten worse as the series has gone on. And Cold Steel 2 is probably the worst of the ones that I've played in regards to, you just lose every single major fight in a cutscene, which sucks. And only a couple of them feel justified. One that does feel justified in Act 1 is the double fight with McBurn and Duali. It's both like really fun gameplay-wise, and there is like some actual differences if you do complete the optional objective of beating Duali, which is nice. Even if it does end up contradicting the story later on when you fight Duvalie solo much later in the game, and it's like, okay, it's supposed to be a real fight, even though we've already beaten her when McBurn was supporting her. So it's like, why am I supposed to like take her seriously now, much later on? But then you move into the intermission, like the pre-intermission section and the actual intermission itself, which is really well done. the whole transition of basically them just attacking Ymir and like taking Reen hostage. I mean, it's cool. Like, it actually kind of makes sense, like something they would do. It does seem odd to just kind of like let Reen and the gang like run free. So them kind of intervening and kind of giving Reen an ultimatum makes sense. One thing about the transition section though is the fight against Rufus is like super unsatisfying to me, because Rufus as a character prior to that has had no build-up as being like someone who's super combat savvy. Like, really the only thing you have is like, yeah, he helped train Eustace, but that just means like, okay, he's like competent, not he can fight literally the entirety of Class 7 at once and easily beat them. It just kind of feels like he's not strong because the game has put in the effort to convince you that he's strong. He's just strong because he has to win this fight because the story demands it. So it's not one that feels good to lose in a cutscene especially. But the actual intermission chapter itself is really good. Talking with all the major antagonists is nice, especially some of the Ouroboros members. Like, I mean, like the talking with Blue Blanc in particular is like really cool. Just like how nice and like casual it is interesting. And then you have the whole thing with Reen accepting that he can do the thing on command, and then the plot literally never has him use spirit unification again for like the rest of the game pretty much, which is really, really odd. That's kind of another like, that's more of a more broad complaint I have with the game, is that spirit unification feels like such a weird plot device because it's so sparingly used. And it also kind of conflicts with Reen's other superpower, which is that he's the mech overlord. And it's like, by giving Reen 2 special powers, it feels like spirit unification is like sidelined. Despite it being introduced earlier, and personal preference wise, I think it's cooler than the mech stuff, but I don't know, I just feel like spirit unification is like really, because they make this whole big deal about like him accepting that he can use this power like on command, and that it's not something to be afraid of, and then he never uses it again in the plot. Even though there's so many different times where there's situations where Reen could have used spirit unification, and he just doesn't. And like, they do kind of somewhat imply there's like, he can overuse it at the end of the intermission section, but it doesn't seem like it has enough of a drawback to never use it, ever. I'm trying to, like, does he ever use spirit unification in a cutscene for the rest of the game? Maybe in, like, the climax? I don't even think he uses it when they're in the Vermilion Tower. Because, I mean, they tease it in the section with Lloyd and Riksha, but he still never does it there. I don't know. It's just a really, like, underutilized plot element, I feel, which sucks. I think it's pretty cool. I mean, it's a cliche, but it's still pretty cool. The courageous section of the game is that it comes after the intermission. It's a cool idea, and I do like the freedom it offers in comparison to the rest of the series, which is generally a lot more, like, not railroady, but it's, you know, it gives you more freedom than, like, the rest of the game really has, because in most of the games, you're restricted to basically just, like, one area at a time, or, like, you know, in the crossbell stuff, where you're just in, like, the city and the surrounding area for, like, the entire game. Which I think works well, but it is kind of nice to kind of get to explore all of, like, Eastern Erebonia, like, at your will. I think it does kind of cause the plot to feel listless at times. This is partially due to me wanting to talk to all the NPCs for every area during every, like, updated dialogue section. But I don't think that's the full reason. I think the plot in general just kind of drags. Just due to the way it's presented during most of Act 2. Because essentially the way, like, the formula for Act 2 is you do, like, 2 random requests that are deemed plot relevant. Most of the time, there's not really a big reason for those. You know, they're still kind of essentially side quests, but they're, like, plot important side quests, which is something the series has always done. But then it's like you do that, and then there's, like, some random event happens, and then you have, like, your you're set up for the capstone event for like that section, right? What would have typically been like a chapter in previous games, but it's just like one part of the acts now. Like, for example, the first part of the Courageous is, you know, you do a couple side quests and then you get back to the Courageous and they're like, oh, Elliot's sister's been kidnapped. Then you go save her. And then it's like, okay, well, we're back. Do 2 more requests. And then it's like, oh no, we got a message from Angelica and Roar. We got to go over there now. It doesn't feel like a lot of the events have like sufficient build-up in comparison to, say, like the formula that a lot of the Trails games took in the past. Like, say, like even Cold Steel 1, right? And let's say Trails 2, where it's like basically the way it works is you go to a new area, you do some kind of busy work. During that course of that busy work, you find a little plot thread. Then that progresses into some like rising action, then a climax, and then that section is done, right? It feels more natural in, say, like CS1 or Trails 2 or the I was gonna say Cold Steel, the Crossbell games as well. Whereas in CS2, it just feels like the plot important events just kind of like appear out of thin air without that sufficient buildup, which makes them feel, I don't know, odd. Even if the events are cool, they just feel a little random at times, which I think kind of help, like it aids to that feeling of listlessness to the plot at times during Act 2. Then you kind of, like, after that, you could do like the you're doing retaking Celtic stuff, then you do the Roar stuff. Then you have like the Sword and Shrine section, which is well, I think they set it up, right? But you have some other stuff before that. Well, like you do like one of the shrines and then you have some more plot stuff that happens, which is nice in that case because the shrines are kind of boring. But I'm just going to talk about the shrine section as a whole right now. And then we'll actually kind of move on to the Celtic Duvalie stuff that technically happens like midway through the shrine stuff. But like the shrine and building Reen's sword section is just, I don't know. Like, I mean, I like the idea of building a sword for Reen as a way to give him like an in-universe like power boost to put him on Crow's level, since they've, you know, continually established that Crow is a better mech user than him. And they've attributed it to Crow having like a special weapon and Reen doesn't. So like, I like that in the sense that it's like, oh, well, Reen is now as strong as Crow because like of a real concrete reason, as opposed to just like, oh, he just is stronger now because we're at the end of the game. Like, they've actually given him a real power boost. But I think a better way to do it would have just been for like Valimar to have the special weapon by default from like the start of CS, or not the start of CS1, but you know, the end of CS1. Because it is weird that he doesn't have a special weapon, if you think about it. Because like, you would assume he would have had a special weapon back with his previous pilot all those years ago, yet now it's just like gone. So it is kind of odd that he doesn't have one at all. So I think it would have made more sense for it to be that Valimar has a special weapon, and the power boost comes from Reen being able to utilize Spirit Unification while piloting Valimar. Since that would... Because like Reen coming to terms with that he can use Spirit Unification as like a tool for good and something that he shouldn't be afraid of happens after his last fight with Crow. Like, because, you know, when he fights Crow like right before the intermission. And so then having it be that, well, next time they fight Crow at the end of the game, Reen is able to fight him on that level because he can use Spirit Unification while in Valimar would be, like, cooler to me, because A, it utilizes the Spirit Unification plot device in conjunction with the mech stuff, and you kind of just don't have to do the whole, like, building a sword stuff that's kind of boring. It's just, I don't know. Like, the shrines themselves are not very interesting. They're just, like, they're a little too reminiscent of, like, the old schoolhouse dungeons. And, the actual boss fights in the shrines, with the exception of, like, Big Bird when you fight Grianos, which is kind of interesting. But the Magic Knight fights are not any good, just because the Magic Knight fights are not well designed on, like, a base level because of the immense healing they all have. Which is just annoying more than anything. But then you do have the Celtic Burns section, which is really well done, and it's the closest the game gets to making the country really feel like it's at war, which is a bit of an issue with the game. It's one I kind of overlook just because of, like, I think it's more of a budgetary thing, right? When it comes to, like, there's a hard time, like, portraying the true scale of the war in Erebonia, because Erebonia doesn't really feel like it's at war. And I think that's something that they realize, which is why there's so many references to the fact that, like, the real war is going on in the West. Which, I get, but at the same time, it is kind of annoying that, like, there's all these hints about, like, oh, all this stuff is going down in the Western Erebonia, and then you never get to see any of it, which does suck. Because I don't know. Because it's like they realize that, like, well, we can't really, you know, create this feeling that Erebonia is at war. So instead, we're just going to have it be like, well, Eastern Erebonia is mostly at peace, and, like, the real shit's going down in the West, so that we don't have to, like, do it. Which I get it, because it's, you know, definitely a budgetary thing, so you have to realize these games are, you know, really just like a step above indie level, when it comes to that sort of, like, the development and everything. So, like, I kind of get that, and, like, I wouldn't necessarily have it as, like a real mark against the game, but it is, a little weird at times that they constantly mention that the war is going on in the West, and, like, you just never get to see any of it, which kind of sucks. But then, you know, right after the Celtic Burns things, you have the part where you fight Duvali, and it's actually one of the better, like, gameplay fights, at least in the main story. Like, of the non-optional fights, like, the Duvali fight is one of the better ones. But it makes, like, no sense, like, plot and lore-wise, considering you can already beat her when she's being supported by McBurn much earlier in the game. So then later on, when all the main cast are, you know, in theory much stronger, and there's more of you fighting her, yet it's supposed to be like she's a real challenge for them, and they also imply that she's, like, weakened from getting her ass slapped in Crossbow. So it doesn't really make sense there. In that sense, I mean, at the very least, you don't get saved in a cutscene there. She just kind of, like, leaves, which is, I guess, better. At least I'm pretty sure you don't get saved in a cutscene in the Duvali fight. She just kind of, like, says, I don't want to fight you anymore, and teleports away. And then, kind of to wrap up Act 2, you know, you build the sword and everything, and then you retake Thor's Academy, which is, like, a cool idea, but I have to admit, the boss fight for retaking Thor's, being the students, is, I'm not a huge fan of. I mean, I talked about this in the Let's Play itself, that, like, the idea that those students would even be close to the level of Class 7, who are already established by the end of CS1 as being, like, head and shoulders above everyone else, based on the fact that they're the ones who take care of all the old schoolhouse stuff and defend the academy from the attack with the teachers. You know, it's just Class 7 that does that. Nobody else helps out. So it's, like, the idea that while Class 7 has been off, like, fucking single-handedly winning the war and, like, getting actual combat experience, that the students who have just been chilling out at the academy are, like, gonna be even close to on their level. Just makes no sense. So, I don't know. I was kind of looking for, like, a more compelling, like, conflict there, as opposed to you just fight, like, 4 students. Or technically 8 students. Like, I don't know. There should have been, like, some, like, you fight some soldiers and stuff as well or something. I don't know. I mean, they do offer an explanation for why there's no soldiers there, but, like, I don't know. Like, retaking Thor's didn't feel like the big event that you've been looking forward to the entire game, basically. Because it's just like, oh, you fight, you know, you have, like, a 4v4 fight twice. And, like, the fights are pretty annoying. At least that one with Ice Lady is really annoying, because there's just so many statuses between the 4 of them that, like, if you get unlucky, you just instantly lose. Yeah, I don't know. I was a little underwhelmed by the whole retaking the academy part, even though, like, the idea is cool. I just, like, the execution was off. And then going into Act 3 and the Bond events, I'm not going to talk about the Bond events too much because, well, I feel like I probably talked about them in the video itself, and honestly, it's been too long that I can't. Because I thought about doing like ranking the Bond events, but like I don't remember them well enough, and I don't want to watch my like 2-hour Bond video again to refamiliarize myself. Because I mean, essentially, I kind of like am of the same opinion. The directly romantic ones are the weakest, while the ones that are more like friendship based or just vaguely romantic feel better. Just because I feel like none of the characters have like enough direct romance build up for those like love confessions to feel good in like the directly romantic ones. So the ones that are kept more like vague feel more reasonable, and then the friendship ones are just, you know, they're all fine. But yeah, overall, Bond events, good idea. I mean, they're cool, but, you know, they've been lacking something. And for the most part, I still just kind of am of the opinion that having a set relationship, especially for, like, the romance side of things, like, either I feel like Bond events should be, like, purely platonic, and there should just be, like, one set canon romance if they're gonna have that in the game, as opposed to, you know, pick a waifu type stuff. Other Act 3 stuff, the super secret Magic Knight fight is a lot of fun. It is also extremely annoying, at first at least, before you realize that he eventually will stop using the constant guards. The fight is like pure suffering. But once you realize that like he eventually will stop guarding and reflecting altogether, the fight becomes a lot more manageable. Just because, like, you know, you just have to, like, weather the first, like, 15 minutes. I mean, it is still, like, way too long, but it is one of the only fights that required, like, real theory crafting to beat, from what I remember. And actually, I had to, like, grind for it, because I remember I had to grind, I think, to get Chevalier to level 5 for my strategy to work there. But, I mean, it's a fun fight. Definitely one of the more memorable ones in, honestly, the entire series, with the difficulty mod on it and everything. And then, I mean, there's like some side stuff you do in Act 3, but let's move on to like the climax, right? With the Vermilion Tower and everything, which the Vermilion Tower basically feels extremely mismanaged, but also kind of cool. It's basically, that whole section is obviously very reminiscent of the final, like the tower from Trails in the Sky 2 and the boss gauntlet that it has, but you have none of the payoff in Cold Steel 2, which kind of makes all the boss fights feel bad and almost pointless. Because, like, to compare there, in Sky 2, you essentially, that final boss gauntlet represents your third time fighting each of the 4 enforcers. Prior to that point, you've had 2 encounters with the enforcers apiece. You know, you face off with the enforcers the first time, they're like, you're not even close to my level, fight some ads, see ya. The second time, you fight them, and it's inconclusive. Essentially, the fight's in before a real victor happens, because they accomplish their objective and they leave, because they're just trying to stall you. So it's like you lose the first encounter, you draw the second one, and this is the part where you win. And you fight the enforcers, and you beat them, and then you move on to the end of the game, and blah blah blah, the game ends, and it's great, and I love it. In Cold Steel 2, it's your second encounter with these characters, with the exception of Duvalie, who's your third time fighting her. And instead of this being the part where you, like, beat them, or at least, you know, like, don't get saved fighting them, like, you lose all 3 fights prior to fighting Crow and, I know her name. I mean, she's Misty, but what's her real name? I can't remember. I don't know. But when you're fighting Crow and Misty, like, prior to that, you know, you fight the Zephyr duo, then you fight, well, no, you fight Duvalie and Blue Blanc, then you fight the Zephyr duo, then you fight McBurn, and that really should have been the part where you beat Blue Blanc and Duvalie and you beat the Zephyr duo as like a moment of growth for the party. And instead, you just have to get saved in a cutscene, which feels really bad. Because you don't get that cool payoff that you got from Sky 2, where it's like, okay, now we finally beat these enforcers, and triumphed over them. and instead you just kind of like get saved by random NPCs, and it's like, why am I here? Maybe, why don't they just do the tower stuff? Or it's like, why even have us fight the enforcers in the first place is probably a better way to put it. Like, just have it be like, as soon as they pop up, just be like, Oliver and Tov show up and they're gonna fight them instead to buy you time, because it's important that you get to the top. And it's not because we literally can't let the gang actually be anybody in the story, or else I don't know, it'd be bad if you ever had any accomplishments. The McBurn fight does get a pass though, because it feels like it serves a purpose for two reasons. A, you get to see McBurn's super special form, which is cool, and it also kind of establishes his power level more in the series, and it also fulfills the foreshadowing of a Victor McBurn fight that happens in the intermission, when McBurn basically says that he really wants to fight Victor because he's the only one he thinks is like on his level. So like the McBurn Victor, like when Victor comes in to save you, it actually feels pretty good, like plot wise, because it doesn't feel like the gang should be as strong as McBurn, and it's just there was actual build up to that, I guess. Whereas, for example, when you're fighting Blue Blanc and Duvally, it doesn't feel like they should be stronger than the game, considering you've beaten Duvally twice at that point, and Blue Blanc is, I mean, I don't know if, I mean, he's essentially the weakest enforcer. Like, I don't know if the game has ever really stated that, but come on. He's like the weakest direct combat enforcer. So it doesn't feel like he should be all that stronger than Class 7, especially when you consider that there's like, it's a 12v2 fight, like technically. So, yeah. One second, we're gonna pause while I get some water. Okay, I'm back. Oh yeah, another thing that I should mention, talking about the tower fights, there's something that kind of annoys me about like the fact that they're so convinced that the gang can never beat anyone, is that like you can still, like you can have Class 7 win these fights and still also have the enforcers and Zephyr and them be stronger than Class 7, right? Because the fights are numerically unequal. Because basically, like, yes, the Zephyr members are still going to be, say, like, stronger individually than each member of Class 7, but just have it be like, oh, through the power of their just immense numbers, they win. So there's still room for improvement on the individual level, but Class 7 gets to feel strong and powerful, right? It gets to feel like you're actually, like you matter in the course of like beating these opponents, and you're not having to like rely on others. It's very, I think I used this example in the Let's Play as well, but like, take the Cassius fight in Sky 3, where you fight him, it's made very clear that he is not holding back, you beat him legitimately, but the caveat is that it's a 4v1 fight. So it's like, yes, you get the accomplishment of beating Cassius, and it's a growth moment for, like if you bring Estelle and Joshua to the fight, it's like a moment of growth for them, getting to beat their dad. But Cassius is still canonically stronger than them all individually, because it took 4 of them to beat him. So it's like Cassius still gets to be a badass, there's still tons of room for improvement on the individual level, but you still get the accomplishment of growth. And I don't know why they can't do that in this game, when you technically have even more people fighting at once. Because, I mean, it's not even like they regularly split the party. Like, most of the time, it's technically like all 12 people are fighting, right? It's just you only have 6 in combat at once just for gameplay reasons. But everyone else is still there for, like, the major fights, right? And even then, even if they are, like, in those sections where, like, everyone does sit on the first floor for some reason, like, it's still, like, a 6 or 7v, like, 2 fight. So you can still kind of have them win and still have the enforcers or whoever they're fighting feel like badasses. So I don't know. It's just weird. Because I mean, this is the end of like the second game in the series, and at the end of the final dungeon, you're still not letting the main cast have victories. It just doesn't feel good. I kind of lost like track of where I was in my notes. There you go. So we talked about McBurn. So moving on to the actual like climax with the Vermilion Lord and everything. I mean, I talked about this in the LP, but like the way the Vermilion Lord gets summoned or whatever he's called is really fucking dumb. Like really, really dumb. Like I get it. I get why he has to be summoned because you don't tease the super duper evil overlord and then not let him get summoned. So that would feel bad as well if it didn't get summoned. But the fact that like the way it gets summoned is that Vita and Crow just like stand AFK while Cayenne summons the Vermilion Devil, or I can't remember what he's actually called. I know he's Vermilion something, but like he has like a special title. I don't know if they call him the Lord or the Devil, the Vermilion blah blah blah. Like it's just, they just stand there and they're like, no, Cayenne, don't do that. I'm like, why would you even have let Cayenne be in the position to summon the Vermilion thing if you didn't want to summon the Vermilion thing? Like if you were just using Cayenne to summon the tower, which is I think what they were going for, as soon as the tower's summoned, tie Cayenne up, cast a magic spell on him, anything. Don't let him be 2 feet away from summoning the Vermilion Overlord if you don't want him to summon the Vermilion Overlord. So it's like, I feel like it would have made more sense if Vita and Crow actually wanted it to get summoned, but instead they're like, well, no, we can't let them be like the bad guys. We want them to be like sympathetic at the end. So it's like, well, they didn't want this to happen, but they just kind of did everything in their power to enable it and let it happen. So it's just, I don't know. The presentation there is all off. Even if I do agree with the end goal there of like, you from a plot perspective, you should let it get summoned because you don't tease the ultimate evil and then not let you fight the ultimate evil. That would feel just as bad, basically. Or maybe not just as bad, but it would feel bad as well. So then, moving on to basically the end of the game, almost. Crow's death is... honestly, Crow's character, and this is kind of something we'll talk a bit more later about, but like, Crow's character is probably the thing that I feel is the biggest lost cause in this game. Or like, one of the biggest weaknesses. Is because Crow's character is very mismanaged in this game. Because essentially, at the end of CS1, you know, they reveal Crow to be C, and that C is behind the murder of Osborn, and also, essentially, all the actions of the Liberation Front. And at the end of CS1, Crow is essentially presented kind of as an antagonist, right? He taunts Reen, he says, you know, our friendship didn't matter, it was never real, I'm a bad guy, basically. And they throw that all away as soon as Crow shows back up in CS2, and he's like all buddy-buddy again with Reen. And he's like, oh, well, you know, I mean, I'm just doing what I think is best for to end the country, to end the war, and for the best of the country. And they try and make him this sympathetic character, but they never address the elephant in the room, that Crow's a mass murderer. And an attempted mass murderer. Because he comes up with the plan to attack Guerrilla, to get the guns, and even though the guns don't go off and don't end up killing thousands of people in Crossbell, dozens do still get murdered in Guerrilla. So he still has blood on his hands there, plus all the other activities of the Liberation Front that happen off-screen. So it's like, essentially, they try and have this whole, like, redemption setup for Crow, where that's, like, part of the main story, right? Is that we have to rescue Crow and, like, bring him back to his senses so that we can be a big, happy family again. When really, Crow is already past the point of... like, he's already unredeemable prior to Cold Steel 2 even starting, just because of his actions at Guerrilla Fortress. So Crow can't be a sympathetic villain, or like someone who can be redeemed, because he's already unredeemable from a moral standpoint. So you always kind of know that Crow is going to die at the end of this game. because that's the only answer to the question of what's going to happen with Crow. Obviously, even if there was some, like, if Osborn was actually dead, right? There's no way for him to return to, like, a normal life. And just morally speaking, you wouldn't want him to return to a normal life because Crow has committed an unspeakably bad action by killing all those people at Guerrilla and then trying to bomb a civilian metropolitan area. So essentially, it's just the whole Crow stuff just feels bad because they never address Crow's real crimes. Like, as far as CS2 is concerned, the only bad thing Crow has done is shoot Osborn, when that's, like, the least morally bad thing Crow has done. Because if it had just been that Crow had shot Osborn, that's actually an interesting, like, morally gray area almost, right? Because even though you can pretty easily say that, like, what Osborn did to Crow does not warrant Crow murdering Osborn, but the audience also knows, based on the previous games, that Osborn is obviously not good for the country, and him being in power is actually worse for the entire continent. So you can kind of almost support the outcome there of Osborn dying, and it's also kind of fitting for his character, right? Since it's very clear that he rose to power on the suffering of others. I mean, he's the Blood and Iron Chancellor. He paid this path with blood and iron. So it seems fitting for someone that he wronged to kill him. But you kind of, like, never even really think about the Osborn stuff because you're like, yeah, what about bombing Crossbell? That's not good. There's no real justification for that. You know, your quest for vengeance doesn't mean that you can kill thousands of innocents. And they never even addressed the idea that it would have killed Toa as well if the attack was successful. And Crow obviously knew that Toa was going to be there. So really, there's, like, essentially two things needed to be changed for Crow to be a sympathetic character. Which is, you have to, first things first, eliminate the Guerrilla Fortress attack. It's a great teaser start to Cold Steel 1. But it actually is probably the biggest problem with the plot of CS2 and, like, Crow's storyline, is that the Guerrilla Fortress attack makes him unredeemable because of all the loss of life there and the potential, like, attempted murder of everyone in Crossbell. And another change that would have to be made is that if you eliminate the Guerrilla Fortress attack, which you could explain for in Azure when they're going to blow up the airships and collapse Orkia's tower, is you could have that explained as, like, oh, that was G, like, on his own. Crow never wanted that to happen. Like, have it be that G was more radical. And that actually would make Crow kind of sympathetic because he's essentially kind of, like, assembled this band of people without maybe checking into their backgrounds fully. And they're more radicalized than him and more willing to let innocents die to achieve their goal. And you can kind of have a bit of sympathy for Crow being, like, thrown into this position of, like, leadership without the age and maturity to really vet people. Like, he's just so concerned with vengeance at any cost that he ends up recruiting people that are more willing to cross lines that maybe he's not willing to cross. But because you make Crow the leader and the one that comes up with the plans, that makes it like he's the one who has to be held responsible for the attack on Guerrilla and the potential bombing of Crossbell. Even if Crow didn't directly kill anyone there, it was still his actions that resulted in their deaths, and they never address this fact, right? It's just kind of like they ignore it and hope you forget that it happened because Crow's character being redeemed makes no sense if you remember Guerrilla Fortress. And honestly, I just think that really sucks because Crow had, like, a lot of potential as an antagonist just because, like, I mean, I really like the idea of, you know, party members turning into bad guys, because you're already invested in their character just on from when they were part of the gang, right? And so really the story of CS2 should have been less about redeeming Crow and more about Reen trying to bring his friend to justice because of his actions. And there could still be some like element of like Crow's friendship with Reen was real and that like it meant something, but at the same time Reen could like prove his like moral like it could be like a cool character moment where he has to put his morality above his friendship with Crow, where really it feels like the opposite there, where he's willing to ignore the fact that Crow is complicit in so many murders just because, well, they were buds. And that kind of makes Reen feel like a bit stinky, if I'm being honest. But I think that's mostly everything I wanted to say about Crow. It's essentially that Crow, to wrap it up, Crow either needed to be a full-on bad guy, or he had to be actually sympathetic. Instead, they basically made him instantly not sympathetic because of his actions in the first game. So the whole idea of redeeming Crow is not something I could really ever get on board with, because on a moral level, he has already crossed the line of being unredeemable. So he needed to be like a real antagonist who maybe was like, I stand by, you know, we had to kill Osborn at any cost, which I wouldn't agree with, but it would actually feel a bit better if Crow was someone who was like so corrupted by hatred that he was willing to, or if they at least like kind of explored his motivations more, I guess, and like maybe made him into like someone who's like a bad guy, as opposed to constantly being like, oh, Crow, you know, he just wants to do the right thing, which is what they kind of present that a lot, when that's obviously just not true as far as I'm concerned. Then we move into like the epilogue, and well, we'll also talk about the Osborn reveal like in connection to the epilogue. The Osborn reveal is cool. I actually really like it. I probably should have like seen it coming earlier. I don't know. That one did take me really by surprise. I mean, it didn't, because it's like when it happened, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. But I was also like, I didn't have any inkling of it prior to it. So I wouldn't say I was shocked by it, but I didn't expect it. And it is like an extra, because like, you know, Osborn being alive is obviously not a reveal for anyone who played Azure, because Azure spoils Cold Steel because it's bad. Or the epilogue, or like, you know, the credit scene for Azure is really bad, and the best way to play the games is to play them in chronological order up through Azure, and then as soon as the Azure credits start, you alt F4 the game and you start playing Cold Steel 1, and that's like the perfect play order. You get to ignore the spoilers from the final credit section of Azure, and you get to also have all the crossbell context for the CS games. That's the perfect play order. Just alt F4 Azure as the credits start. So like, you know, Osborn is still alive, of course, if you've played through the games like in chronological order. But the extra twist of Osborn being Reen's father, you don't necessarily expect. So it's kind of like, oh, you knew Osborn was going to be alive, but did you know this? So it kind of has some extra weight to it. And then double extra weight if you hadn't played Azure, so you didn't know that Osborn was still alive, even though they had hinted that he was still alive a few times prior to that. So that shouldn't have been like a massive surprise. But you know, you have that reveal, and then you have the time skip. I don't like the time skip at all. I think the time skip was a really bad idea, because I feel like it undermines that revelation, like the shock factor of it, and like, because I want to see the aftermath of that instead of just fading to, well, there's two things. You either needed to like fade to black completely and be like, that's the fucking end of the game. If you want to see the aftermath, you gotta buy the next one. That would have been kind of badass. I would have been a little annoyed in the moment, but that would have been a fucking awesome cliffhanger. If they're like, Osborn's Reen's dad, fucking roll credits, see in CS3, boys. That would have been pretty cool. Instead, they do this time skip where it feels like they skip the actual, like, what it means for Reen's character in future for the sake of this shocking scene of like Reen working for Osborn and fighting Calvert on the border and then helping the intelligence division. Which, the reason I had such a visceral, raw, like, negative reaction to that scene is A, it's completely out of character. It is against everything that Reen has been characterized prior to that point, which isn't necessarily a bad thing if you provide the context. If you get to see Reen struggle with, like, should I work for Osborn? You know, it does technically go against, like, Crow would have never wanted him to, and at the end of CS2, it's very clear that Reen still respects Crow. And there's no way that Crow would have ever wanted Reen working with Osborn to oppress a country in the same way that his home country was basically, like, taken over. So it does feel like they have this whole, like, big dramatic scene where, like, Crow dies, and then 5 minutes later in game you have you have Reen doing something that Crow would have never wanted. That, like, Crow would have never respected Reen's actions there. So it does feel like Reen is kind of, like, instantly spitting on Crow's memory. Which, granted, there is, like, a month time skip there, but, like, as far as, like, for the player, I mean, it's been, like, 5 minutes. So it just feels really bad. But yeah, I just feel like the time skip after the Osborn reveal, like, it undercuts the weight of, like, what that means for Reen's character and, like, the aftermath of, like, his future. Because they cut forward, and then you have that whole, like, really confusing Thor section where it's like everyone's like, oh, wait, Reen is still in school, but everyone else is leaving? Why? We didn't go over this? Wait, are some people leaving? No, everyone's leaving. Wait, everyone's leaving? Why is everyone leaving? I get why some people are leaving, but, like, because they don't do anything with it, because they just skip forward a month, and there's no explanation. There's no, context for it. You don't get to see that scene where Class 7 tells Reen that we're not coming back. You know, that could have been a really powerful scene, and it could have meant a lot for Reen's character. Like, have that, like, show that to me. Let me see, like, a meeting where Class 7 tells Reen that he's going to be alone next year. And then maybe have it be, like, right after. That's when Reen decides to go to Crossbell. You know, because he's distraught. He doesn't know what he's going to do with his life. Everyone else is moving on, and he's stuck in school. That could have been really cool. And instead, you just skip forward a month so you can show the scene of Valimar on the border and Reen killing those people in the airship. Those people are fucking dead, by the way. There's no way they're not dead. Don't get murdered. Reen killed those people. Okay? They exploded and they crashed to the ground from up in the air. Those people are dead. Yeah, because, I mean, that's another one of the reasons why the scene is, like, so bad, because it's just, like, Reen, who, prior to, like, that, like, he was so distraught over his very minor role in V's death, and then, like, as far as, for, like, the player, it's been, like, not that long since that, and here's Reen murdering people in the war. Like, what? That seems super out of character. But, and it would have been more understandable if we had been provided the reasoning and the context and build up for Reen's decision to go work with the intelligence division in Crossbell. And because it's like, we also, like, we kind of get hinted at, like, he's super conflicted over his role in the intelligence division, like with his dialogue with Claire right after he gets back, and more specifically with Toa, right, where he kind of, like, breaks down a little bit. And it's like, let us see that first before the scene in Crossbell. I guess that's kind of how I feel. Or, you know, you could actually even, like, lean into the idea that, because, I mean, I'd still stand by the idea that, like, Reen is not supposed to be the good guy in that section. Like, you're not actually supposed to agree with his actions in Crossbell. I mean, I can kind of get being more, like, on his side if you hadn't played the Crossbell games, but, like, it's very clear that he is not the good guy there, right? I feel, and you're not supposed to necessarily approve of his decisions, which isn't a bad thing, right? Characters can make mistakes. It's just, I want to have their reasoning for why they're making this mistake, I guess, is kind of how I feel. about the whole like section, and instead they just kind of skip that, and they're like, Reen's conflicted, but like we don't really get to go into why he's conflicted. So it's essentially, I think the time skip either, like honestly, it's either you have to make the epilogue longer and not have the time skip, or you just kind of like end the game after the Osborn reveal, and then just have like the CS3 prologue be the aftermath of that revelation, and like Reen learning that he's going to be alone next year at Thor's, and you know, his decision to go to Crossbell and everything, and work at the Intelligence Division. I just feel like that needed more to it, and so it's either you make CS2 even longer, you make the epilogue, you know, more. Honestly, actually, you don't have to make the epilogue longer, you just have to get rid of the Reverie Corridor section, which I'm not really going to talk about very much. It's bad, and I don't like it. It adds nothing to the game. I mean, it's cool as, like, an idea of having, like, a dungeon where you can use every playable character, but it doesn't really add anything to the game. I mean, you have, like, the final scene where it's, like, the last thing Class 7 does together, and, like, there is something to that, but I don't know. It's like you already had the Vermilion Tower, which was a much cooler final dungeon in comparison to the Reverie Corridor, and the final boss is just not interesting at all, and also it's really, really bad gameplay-wise. That enrage mechanic is fucking awful. Like, so bad. Like, just, you hit his arbitrary HP threshold, you don't get to play the game anymore. If you don't beat him with S-breaks, you literally lose. Yeah, okay, that's cool. Good mechanic. About as good as the Azure Enrage mechanic. With the, oh, yeah, we're gonna cast an ability that looks exactly like all the other abilities, but this one actually just instantly ends the fight if you don't kill the boss before that. Now that one's not as bad because there's at least like, I mean, it's still really bad for reference. Like, I think that enrage mechanic is awful as well, but at least there's like some tell to it, and like you can theoretically like burst. But granted, there isn't really a tell to it because it looks like all the other attacks. The only reason you would know it's gonna wipe you is if you've died to it already, which is why it's a bad mechanic. But yeah, I mean, the final goodbye scene is really good. But overall, the whole epilogue is like both kind of drags, and it feels rushed at the same time. Like, it feels like there's too much time devoted to shit that doesn't matter, like the Reverie Corridor, the fighting the other students and the principal, like the final whole free day stuff. Like, instead of that, just give me some scenes where Reen is alone in his room brooding over the fact that Osborn's his dad, and like what that means for his future, or the fact that all his friends are going to be gone. Like, I want to see that. I don't want to fight Patrick. So now we're going to do, we're going to talk a little bit about the difficulty mod, and then we're going to do character power rankings, and then we're going to do a conclusion, and then I'm going to end the video. That's the agenda here. So overall, I'm probably going to keep the difficulty mod talk pretty short, because I don't think that many people are interested in it, and I've talked about it to death in the LP. Basically, the difficulty mod is worse than it is in CS1. I still think I probably enjoyed the game a bit more than I would have without the difficulty mod, because there were still some great fights with the difficulty mod on. You know, the Duvally solo fight, both McBurn fights, the super secret final boss. There's others, I swear. I mean, the first cryptid fight was pretty good. The rest were all kind of lame. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's it. But I mean, there were some good fights there, because of the difficulty mod. But overall, it was like, the game was still like too easy. Like, I felt like the game was much easier on average with the difficulty mod than it was in CS1, where CS1 felt like every fight was like a fucking struggle. Like, you had to actually like think and come up with a specific strategy for like almost every fight. Whereas I didn't find myself doing that as much in CS2. And I was also handicapping myself more in CS2. Because like the only stuff that was really hard in CS2 were like the optional stuff. like some of the fights where you had to like win in a certain number of turns. Like I didn't know there were optional conditions for the first two like major boss fights against Zephyr and Blue Blanc, so I didn't even try and go for them, so I don't know how hard those were. But like the beating Duvally and McBurn was like fairly difficult. Beating Rufus in 40 turns or whatever was pretty hard. Not really hard, you just kind of had to get lucky. Because I don't really like the turn order stuff in the first place. I would rather just be like, you have to beat them and just take your, like, it's either you beat them or you don't. As opposed to the, like, beat them in 30 or 40 turns or whatever. I just don't really like that as, like, a restriction. Very much. But, I mean, really my biggest issue with CS2 is probably more of, like, a base level design mechanic, which was the insane amount of regen most bosses had. And I'm not sure to what degree the mod would have been able to fix that. So like I'm not necessarily holding that against the difficulty mod. Now, if they could have removed the healing and they didn't, I'm a little mad. But I assume that was probably something that like you can't adjust that much. Like maybe those characters have to use those moves. I don't know if you could have removed that. Like the healing aspect of some of those buff moves or what. But overall, I just enjoyed the CS1 difficulty mod like way more. It felt more engaging with how like statuses were relevant and more viable overall for a lot of the fights. There were more hard and memorable fights throughout CS1 with the difficulty mod, whereas in CS2, basically all the main story was still really easy. With the exception of like some of the optional win condition stuff, but I also just think turn counters and like beating a boss in like X number of turns is just not very fun in the first place. I don't really like the burst, and that's one of the reasons why I'm playing with the difficulty mod, is because I don't like the burst meta of the normal games. Or I don't like the idea of them, I guess. And like, you know, even with the difficulty mod on, I still kind of had to handicap myself and present myself from using some of the mechanics. Which is disappointing, because part of the reason why I play with the mod is so that I can actually use most of the game mechanics it gives me without feeling like I'm just gonna make the game a joke. Now, I mean, there were some times where like I mean, there was really just like the final boss, right, where I just like basically was like, fuck, I really want to beat this game. I'm tired of like the enrage is so annoying, that I remember I broke down, like equipped some stuff that like I wouldn't have normally equipped, but that wasn't necessarily because the final boss was hard. Like the Vermilion, not the Vermilion Overlord, but the Shadow, whatever it was. In the Reverie Corridor, it was just more like, that fight sucks. It's like, it's way too long, and it's like, if you get to the enrage without max CPU and everyone, you just like instantly lose. Yeah, it's not good. Okay, we're gonna pause again for a second, and then we will do a tier list, kind of. It probably won't be that long. I'll probably try and keep it abbreviated because we're already at an hour, but should be kind of funnish. I didn't really think about it too much ahead of time, so it's gonna be kind of like off the cuff, but we'll see how it goes. All right, we are back. Oh god, let's see if this works. Okay, I don't see any revealing personal information. So this is like a tier list I found. It has like technically all like fucking characters in the entire game. We're just gonna do playable people that were in the Reverie Corridor plus Celine. And Lloyd's up there just towering above everyone because he was there and I had to put him on the list somehow. So yeah, these are our tiers. I didn't really like think about this very much, or like a criteria or a formula or anything. The formula is gonna be how much each character makes my heart sing when I think about them. And you might be thinking, that doesn't make any goddamn sense. And like, yeah, it doesn't. It's my list, my rules. It's just gonna be kind of like a general feeling. I don't know. It's not really based on anything, but just how I feel when I think about the character. So we have our tier list. We have Almost Randy tier, which is like essentially like your S tier. Your Oliver tier. Your Shara tier, which are basically all like Almost Randy. Like these are your characters that are almost as good as Randy, which is, you know, the pinnacle of the series, right? Characters that would probably go in this tier from previous entries, like Chloe. Lloyd might make it. Lloyd could almost be in the Almost Randy tier, I think. Not too many are in the Almost Randy tier. Then you have the Oliver tier, which is just like all around very solid, good characters. You know, almost some of the best in the game, but maybe they're lacking a little something. Like Oliver, what he's lacking is that he's a little fucking problematic, and sometimes he talks, and I'm just like, shut the fuck up. Please stop talking. That's what keeps you in the Oliver tier. Shara, good characters that have some development, but they're missing something. There's something just not quite there, which is kind of how I feel about Shara. Where like she has a cool backstory. There's some good, like, you know, moments, especially in that, like, side story in Trails 3. Or, the one where it's, like, her as a bracer, and, you know, you have the whole backstory of, like, her growing up in the slums. Then you have, like, the Ellie tier, which is you're, like, I don't dislike the character, per se, but, like, I just feel like they don't have anything going on for them. Like, I don't know, just something about them just, it just doesn't do it for me. And then you have this tier, which, I mean, you know who's going to go here. You already know. So we're going to start with Alphen. Alphen, I don't actually know where Alphen would be. Because she's like, you know, she's not like, she's a main character, but she's also not a main character. So she's already at a disadvantage there. I think she goes in Ellie tier. Honestly, she's like almost, I mean, she's almost this tier. Because then I think about, like, what is Alphen's purpose in this story besides being horny about Rain? I feel like she has very little going on for her, like as a character. I think she's like, okay, she's like very low Ellie tier, I think. Like she's not quite bottom tier, but she's almost there. Elisa, solid Shara tier. Don't dislike her. She's got some development and everything going for her. It's like Shara tier is like I have a hard time thinking of anything nice to say, but I also can't think of anything negative to say about her. Like just kind of like good. I don't dislike her. I don't hate her. Angelica, solid Ellie tier. Just doesn't have that much going for her, character development wise. She's just kind of there to be like horny. I mean, she had that one thing in CS2 with like her dad, but that's just not enough for me to get over the 16-year-old jokes. Celine, I mean, you're like not like a real character because you weren't, you know, like talked twice in CS1, so you're really just here because it's like I felt weird not having you here because she is in the entirety of CS2. You're probably Ellie tier. I liked Celine a little, like in the prologue, she was kind of okay, but I don't know. I mean, she's just kind of like a cat. I probably shouldn't have put her in the list now I think about it. Claire, I think you're like a high Ellie tier. You're like on the cusp of being in Shara tier, but you're just not quite there. Like nothing's really been done with Claire's character very much at this point. I don't think. I mean, she doesn't make my heart sing. Milliam, you definitely don't make my heart sing, but you do have like some work to your character and development, so you get to be Shara tier. I forgot you were here. Honestly, I cannot stand Elise. You're not the reason this tier exists, but you belong in this tier. Nothing is done with your character. I don't know why you exist. You need to figure out what you do here. Emma's like close Oliver tier. Okay, since no one's in the Oliver tier, I think you get to stay here for now. If it gets filled out more, you might get bumped into Shara tier, but I feel pretty good about Emma being Oliver tier. Well, I don't know. She does, ooh, now that I think about it, I'm like, she does fall into the victim, like the whole, like, I'm just gonna vaguely explain shit or not explain anything all the time. Like where she does that whole like, oh, this is the magic blah blah blah. I was like, why haven't you mentioned that before? You knew that the city could turn into a giant Vermilion Tower and you never mentioned it? You didn't think to say, oh, I wonder if that's what they're fucking doing. You know what? You get to be in Shara tier. I changed my mind. Crow's solid. Well, CS1 Crow is Oliver tier. CS2 Crow is like Ellie tier. So I think you average them out and put her in Shara tier. Or put him in Shara tier. CS1 Crow, big fan. You know, he kind of like wears his villainness on his sleeve at the end. But as I kind of talked about, I feel like CS2, like my biggest actual issue with CS2 is probably the underutilization of Crow as a character and a plot device. So I think that knocks you down to Shara tier. B. You're definitely one of these. I think you, since we don't have an almost Randy tier yet, I think you get to almost be an almost Randy tier. Like, you're on the cusp of being just an Oliver tier, but I think for now you can be an almost Randy tier. I just like Fee. I don't know. Just, I just do. Elliot makes my heart sing. He does. I don't have to explain it. He makes my heart sing. Now, this is partially like, I mean, because like this is where like the gameplay aspect of it like comes in, right? Like, does Elliot deserve to be an A tier because of his character? Maybe not, but he does make my heart sing every time I think about my boy. So I think he gets to be an Oliver tier. Gaius, I'm sorry. Like, you get done fucking dirty in this game. Like, they do nothing with your character, Gaius. Oh god. Is it time? Is it time to finally go off on the horny maid? The horny maid is why this tier exists. I absolutely hate Sharon as a character for 2 reasons. 1, because she's a bad character. 2, because she could almost not be a bad character. That's why I hate her. Like, Elise is just kind of like bad. Sharon could be good, but she's not. And that's why she fills me with rage. Because, like, there's hints to some depth to her character, but instead she spends 99% of the time being a horny maid trope. And there's just, they don't do anything with her. There is potential, right? There is some potential to her character with the Ouroboros backstory and everything. But as of this point in the series, nothing has been done with it. 99% of Sharon's lines are just her being like a Mary Sue who is unbelievably competent, or she's just being horny for Reen for no reason. I can't stand her. Eustace, definitely almost Randy tier. Best character in the game. Eustace he's great. He's just good. I like him, and he's got great character development. He's the closest thing this game has to a Randy, I think. Machias? I could. Would that be the biggest surprise if I put Machias in Oliver tier? No one sees it coming. The Mockster from behind. He does have the best bond event, I think, in CS2. He's also a character I have a lot of fun. Like, I'm glad he's in the game because he's so fun to dunk on as like from a commentary standpoint. I think that means he kind of makes my heart sing a little bit. I think there's a little heart singing going on there. Can I really in good faith put Machias above Crow? I think I can. I think that's how dirty Crow is done by CS2. CS1 Crow easily above Elliot and Machias. CS2 Crow, they just, I don't know. They just, I'm sorry. Laura, you're like, I don't really dislike Laura, but I just don't feel like they really do that much with her character. Like, I mean, you're like high Ellie tier, I think. Because I don't dislike her in any, like, way. But I don't feel, I don't feel like I can put you in the Shara tier. Reen's a hard one. I'm gonna do Reen last. Sarah's, I mean, she's here. She's on the upper end. She's either Oliver or Shara tier. Which one just feels better? Cause, like, I mean, let's think about Sarah. What does she have going for her? I like her. She just, I don't know, I like her dialogue a lot of the times. She's a fun character. She has some character development in regard to her, you know, her backstory as a Jaeger turned bracer turned teacher. What does she have going against her? She's kind of horny bait. Definitely. I acknowledge that. She's a horny bait character, much like Sharon. But I do feel like the game has done more with Sarah at this point than it has done with Sharon. But has it done enough to knock her out of Shara tier? I think it has. I think Sarah gets to be in Sarah tier. Then Toval? Come on. Toval's my boy. Toval, the only thing holding Toval back is that the game was like, we can't have him in it too much, or else, I don't know, no one else to get character development. Like, he's too good. I love Toval. I love my boy Toval. Like, the reason, like, that Toval's so good is I love his, like, the setup between him being, like, this big brother mentor role to Reen. Like, I think that's really well done, and honestly, I wish there was more of it. Because I think it just works so well with both Toval's character and Reen's character, because they're kind of, like, the same. Or, like, in a lot of ways, like, Reen is, like, young Toval. Like, if you look at, like, you know, Toval's backstory. Because, like, one of the biggest conflicts with Reen's character arc is that he's kind of listless. He doesn't really know what he wants to do with his life. And Toval was very much the same prior to becoming a bracer. And kind of Toval sees Reen as, like, the same situation. And that's why he's always trying to recruit him to join the Bracer Guild, because he feels like, I think he sees Reen as a younger version of himself. And that Reen has that capability for good and would probably find fulfillment in bracer work the same way Toval was able to. Toa. I mean, Toa, you're up there. I think you get to be an almost Randy tier. Because, I mean, let's think about it. What does Toa have going for her? She has the best interactions with Reen. I still think she's the character that makes the most sense as, like, the canon, like, romance choice. Like, I think she makes way more sense than Elisa. Like, just based on the actual story interactions Reen has with Elisa and Toa. The ones with Toa are way more personal. And I feel like Toa matters more, like, for, like, Reen's character development. What does Toa have going against her? Well, she actually, like, I mean, for complete context, I thought I was gonna fucking hate Toa when she first got introduced. When she's, you know, like a tiny character. I assumed she was gonna be the, you know, the child. I thought she was gonna be Milliam. Especially but when they're like, oh, but she's like 4'1", but she's like totally 18. Haha, wink wink, not nudge. I was instantly not a fan. But Toa climbed her way up the ladders and the power rankings through sheer force of will, and I would say she makes my heart sing. She gets to be an almost Randy tier, but like at the bottom. Also, I think Fee, you go there, because we're gonna say like left is strongest, right is lowest. So before we do Reen, let's make sure this is all in order. Okay, guys, you get to be here. I mean, you get to be in front of Alphen. Come on, guys. I mean, you're still my boy, kind of. They don't do anything with your character, so I can't in good conscience put you above Ellie tier. Okay, you still get to be in front of Claire. But I do think I think they do more with Laura than they do with Gaius. Shara, I mean, oh, Crow. I mean, Crow could have been, like, freaking actually in Randy tier if he had been done better in the plot of CS2, I think. Milliam. I think this is fine. I think it's like Emma's probably the closest to being an Oliver tier. This seems good. Now Reen. Reen's a weird one. Because I do really hate still what they do at the end with the epilogue with Reen's character, but I do still think there's a ton of potential there. I don't think him joining, like, it's not a bad. I mean, it is like the wrong, like morally wrong decision, you know, helping the intelligence division, but that doesn't mean it's a bad character decision. Because it could still be interesting. I just feel like they don't provide the proper context and build up to that decision, so it just kind of comes out of nowhere and feels like he's just acting completely out of character for no reason. But with that said, I do still like Reen. I think he gets to be an Oliver tier. I think I have to put you in front of Machias, but because I mean the things Reen has going for him are, I mean, it's a lot of just kind of like standard like anime like protagonist stuff. I mean, the main things I dislike about Reen, like, and they're not even like really major things. It's just his like inferiority complex kind of gets on my nerves a little bit at times, but I also kind of get it. I do find like this is more of a plot issue than like a character issue with Reen, but like the wishy-washiness of Spirit Unification, where like the side story that takes place prior to the end of CS1, he seems to be very much like he accepts that Spirit Unification is a thing that he can use and control, but then you spend like the first third of CS2 where he's still afraid of it. And like there is kind of they don't really go into it, but like you can imply that it's because of how he acted in the prologue, but they never really have like dialogue where like Reen expresses that fear again of like, you know, I lost control of myself, or I didn't, you know, I almost killed those people, that type of stuff. Like, I just feel like sometimes you do have to, you know, show and tell at the same time. If that makes any sense. Like, I do think the game was kind of, it's lacking scenes where Reen, like, self-reflects, I think. Which is one of the things that, like, I feel like Estelle and Lloyd, to compare previous protagonists, did a lot. Like, Estelle self-reflected a lot. Lloyd also did it, not as much as Estelle. But, like, I really like that when they kind of, let you get into the mind of, the main characters. So Reen, I would say, he's in Oliver tier. He does have potential going forward, but he's just not there yet. I can't in good faith put you behind Machias. And there's all these other side characters that, like, I mean, they're not worthy of getting a ranking. Right, that is all the playable characters, right? I mean, there's Riksha. Riksha's, I don't know. If we were to assign Riksha a rank real quick, she's like low Oliver tier. That's what I'd say there. And then obviously Oliver belongs in Oliver tier. And Misty, you get to go in fucking garbage tier. Oh, you're so bad. Grianas, you get to be in triple S tier because what the? A bird. You also get to be in garbage tier. Yeah, all right. That's enough of that. Let's put you back and you know what? You can stay. Yeah, this is fine. These are our rankings. You know what, Grianis, you're the best character in the game, sure. Alright, to wrap up, I guess we'll just stay on the screen for now. For the conclusion, overall, CS2 is a good game. It's just that it's a good game in a series filled with great games, is the way I would kind of put it. Overall, the game I think is held back by a lack of like a true compelling direction for most of it. A lot of the story and plot feels listless at times, and many of the plot points, while cool, lack a natural build-up. And that works in some cases, like say like when Celtic burns, you know, that's a surprising cool set piece that builds up fairly naturally into the inciting action of taking, or, you know, trying to arrest the Duke. The continual undermining of the main group's strength is still really annoying, especially when we get to the end of the second game in the series, when it feels like Class 7 accomplished more as rookies in CS1 than you do in CS2 at times. Like, you technically do more in CS2, but it feels like you're always just being carried by, like, some NPC who, like, does, like, the real hard work at the end, as opposed to it being Class 7 doing it on their own. Because it's like you do all the legwork, and then just, like, some NPC steps in at the last second and saves you, and it just doesn't feel good. Crow's potential as a villain is really wasted, I think. That's something that I've really kind of... Like, I wasn't as negative on, like, the way they treat Crow in this game until doing this bullet points and really thinking about it. But honestly, that's probably my biggest issue with the game, is that Crow had so much potential as, like, a really interesting character. And this kind of wishy-washy, like, we're gonna give him, like, a sympathetic treatment where he's, like, still bros with Reen. But at the same time, it seemed like from a story perspective, they're like, well, Crow is fucking irredeemable. There's no way we can write this in a way that he gets to, like, have a normal life, so we have to kill him off. And so, like, I kind of, like, was never, like, I mean, I always really knew Crow was gonna die in this game. Like, really, like, because I just don't know what else you do with this character, right? The question was more just, like, how he died. Or, like, I mean, you could, because really I think he's, like, because you could maybe argue that it's similar to, like, Arios, right? Who Arios did get a redemption arc, kind of. Or at least he's going to get one in the future, I guess. We haven't really got to see it yet, but, you know, he is working with the SSS. But, like, Arios's, like, as a comparison, because they're similar-ish characters, right? Where they're, you know, kind of good guys that end up being revealed as, like, antagonists, but you're still kind of, like, expected to feel, like, a little sympathetic for them. But, like, Arios's thing is that, like, he was more understandable because he was very clearly trapped in his position, which is something I've talked about, you know, a bunch in the LP Reflections video for Azure, and how, like, you know, I had that big turnaround on Arios where, like, I used to actually hate Arios as a character. And it was only after really thinking about it, I'm like, actually, Arios is, like, super well written. You know, the whole, like, the fact that he is presented as being a perfect character, and then you learn that, like, he's actually, that whole perfectness is a complete and total facade, and he's, like, a deeply, fundamentally broken man who is trapped due to his past decisions, but he also can't get out because he has this debt to his daughter, and it's very clear that he lives for his daughter, and he also kind of has this, like, feeling that he can do more good as a bracer, and he's, like, trying to do all this bracer work to offset the sins of his past, and he basically can't out Grimwood and Mariabelle, or else it means he'll go to jail for the murder of Guy, and then Shizuku would grow up, you know, without a father. She would have no one else left. She would literally be, like, blind because there would be no money to fund her treatment. Like, Arios is very clearly trapped, whereas in Crow's position, he does more bad than Arios. As far as you know, Arios has never, you know, murdered a bunch of soldiers at Guerrilla and then tried to bomb a major metropolitan city. And Crow just did it of his own volition, right? Like, his justification for his misdeeds feels much weaker, and it feels more like he chose this path than Arios, who kind of got, like, fucked. Like, he was really, like, it's the way it's implied is he's never going to kill Guy. Like, Guy had him in the palm of his hand, and then Grimwood, you know, locked off that escape route by shooting Guy in the back. So yeah, like, I just, I never really saw a way where Crow could be redeemed, so his death wasn't really surprising, and I do kind of wish as a result they just leaned more into him being a compelling antagonist rather than this wishy-washy, like, sympathetic character that I don't really feel any sympathy for, even though I did like him in CS1. Like, his characterization is good, but the whole, like, the characters and the party camaraderie is still great in the game. The courageous section and, like, the aspect of recruiting Thor students is really cool and, like, works to the game's strength in regards to, like, how well developed NPCs are. Because, like, if you've talked to all the NPCs in the first game, like, recruiting all the students again is really cool. and provides like a good opportunity for like, you know, to expand those storylines and whatnot. But overall, like, you know, the epilogue is kind of, it's like both a wasted opportunity, and it's also like doesn't need to be there. I don't know. I really feel like the epilogue either like you needed to either cut a lot of the fat and replace it with interesting stuff, or just make it a lot longer, which is also kind of bad because I do think CS2 is like a bit too long. I mean, it's not that long if you just like mainline the story, but if you count like everything in the game, right? It does drag at times. But yeah, I just kind of feel like either the epilogue needed to be a lot longer and focus on that real aftermath of the Osborn reveal, and also like just fucking like they don't really ever, and I assume they'll explain this later, like why Osborn abandoned his kid and left him in the snow. If there's like a real reason for that, other than, I don't know, Osborn's kind of like a piece of shit. Like, that's kind of like another thing, is I really would have respected Rean more if after Osborn was like, I'm your dad, if Rean just punched him in the face. Because I feel like that would be your natural reaction. If you're like, hey, I'm your dad, I left you in the snow a long time ago, what's up? You brought up to be a fine young man, smack! Like, I would have respected Rean would be an almost Randy tier if you'd punched Osborn in the face there. I'm just gonna say that. I hope they retcon it and actually they do say that Rean punches him in the face. That should just be the first scene of CS3. It's just Rean beating the shit out of Osborn. Oh man, that'd be great. I would immediately change this list to put him back in almost Randy tier. But I think that's everything. This video is a bit longer than I expected. I kind of wanted to keep it around like, you know, just a little over an hour, but yeah, overall good game. It's just, you know, not as good as the rest of the series. I am still really looking forward to CS3, which I really wanted to start the Let's Play today, but like I just don't have enough time. I want to be able to like, because I don't want to like start it and do like one video or two videos. I want to be able to, you know, sit down and play it for a few hours straight. But yeah, so tomorrow I'll probably start recording that. If there's anything I need to know like in the immediate start, I guess you would want to let me know in this video, because I don't really know when the start of the CS3 Let's Play is going to be. It will probably be like Monday is my deadline. Monday the 31st is like, I want the first video out by then at the latest. Definitely not before Saturday though. Saturday would be the earliest the Let's Play starts. So it'll probably be Sunday. If like my deadline's Monday and Saturday would be the earliest. So yeah, expect the CS Let's Play to start either on the 30th or 31st. Yeah, it should be a fun time. I'm extra cheesy. Oh yeah, also the side story video. I need to do that. There's like a side story in between CS2 and CS3, like a drama CD thing that I guess I'll read. That will go the day after this video. Because I might actually record that like right now. I think I have time. We'll see. But yeah, I want to do that and then start CS3. Should be fun. See y'all then.